Hello and welcome back to Lady Jane Books. Oh my gosh, today is going to be super exciting because not only have we read one of the books that I have been dying to read basically my entire life, let's be honest, but I read it with one of my favorite book discussion guests, Chris. Hi, Chris.
Hello, Jane. I didn't realize this was this first time read for you as well.
Oh, yes, first time read, although it's
Oh,
not my first time knowing the stories. So,
yes, me neither to a certain degree as well. Haven't only watched the Broadway version,
mhm.
but that was 20 years ago or something, just about. So, bit foggy. The songs last longer than the actual plot, if that makes sense. So,
Yeah, and they might be just a little bit better too, but we'll get into that. We'll get
we'll see.
into that. Um, but yeah, actually, funny enough, this was actually my first foray into really, I'm going to say arts. So when I was very small, my parents actually took me to the Broadway show of Phantom of the Opera, and it was one of my first like forays into, going into the city and seeing everything. And I just remember they didn't know a lot about what the Phantom of the Opera was about, and thank goodness, because they may not have actually taken my child self into the theater for that, but I just remember that when I saw the Andrew Lloyd Webber production of it, I was
Mhm.
immediately, like, just
Oh,
floored, and I
yes,
was like,
yes.
"Okay, this is what is probably gonna be a great interest of mine for my life," and it really kicked off my love of, like, writing, music, theater, a lot of theater. I'm actually a
Yeah.
very big theater nerd, um, and so and it's ever since I saw it when I was a very small child, I've really been intrigued about this story.
Mm,
Mostly from the Andrew Lloyd Webber, because I mean, who could
absolutely.
resist the Andrew Lloyd Webber score? But more this and but more so also the story itself and how the story can change even though it's a very classic story,
Mhm.
and it can kind of evolve and have different versions, and just kind of how it stays with us through history, personally.
Yeah.
So I was super excited because I realized I never actually read the book. I'll be honest, I've memorized the entire Andrew Lloyd Webber score. Like, and that is no joke. No, that is actually no joke. I would
So good.
memorize it because I listened to it so much that I would recite it on car trips to the point where my parents were like, "We will not let you start again. I'm sorry, you just did the whole score. We are not going to sit here and listen to it again, Jane. No, I'm sorry. We love you, but no." Um, but yeah, I memorized the entire thing word for word, and
Wow.
I just realized that I've never actually read the story that started it all from
Hmm.
Gaston Leroux. So I had the idea of reading it this year, and then I asked Chris if he was interested in reading it with me because we both appreciate spooky, horror, gothic type of
Hmm.
books. And I'm excited to say we have now read it. So,
Yes.
Chris, was it your first read through of it?
So it was my first read of this at all. I was dreading it a little bit, Jane, because the Amazon listing said it was nearly 500 pages long. And I was like, oh my God, like I've seen the stage adaptation of this. What could possibly be 500 pages about this? Because as far as I was aware, it was basically a single setting. It was a
Yeah.
single thing. So when it arrived and it was what size it was, I was like, oh, thank God for Amazon listings being incorrect. The computers may not take over us someday. And it was very much about the right length. I think it's a perfect length actually for the type of story that it tells. And yeah, my first reading of it, and I had really no expectation of what it was going to be, because often with, especially with musical adaptations and that kind of stuff, they tend to change the core idea and theming of the original quite a lot, uh, as it goes. Now, as it turns out, this one I don't think really did, and I actually think, having seen the theatrical production of it, there's an awful lot of visualizing that is helped actually by, I think, the very iconography of the Lloyd Webber production there, the idea of the domino, etc. That's even on the cover of this, and the kind of masking of what the horror of the Phantom is, especially at the start when nobody else within the story really seems to know what the Phantom looks like, rather, but it sort of creates that picture in your head, creates this sort of overbearing kind of, you know, what's going to happen, what's going to happen. There's almost a tension that runs from the very start of the book, maybe because of my prior experience with the story.
I totally agree. I think part of it is because the Phantom is such a huge character and such kind of a kind of just ones that quite literally would haunt you in some ways, especially reading the story, which was, I think, written back in the early 1900s, if I
Mm-hmm.
remember correctly. I could see how he would be like a very imposing character. So I think that it definitely he as a character has definitely stood the test of time.
Yeah, definitely.
So to start up, so, I'll be honest, I personally found the pacing a little bit slow in paces.
Interesting.
I think this book definitely didn't age super well. I definitely think I could see how it would be very popular at the time,
Mm-hmm.
but I do think, unfortunately, having the Andrew Lloyd Webber, like, image in my brain, it kind of, like, took away a little bit from reading the, original one. But basically, we're kind of started in with this with a very odd prologue where I wasn't, and I'm kind of looking for help here. I wasn't sure if the prologue was more meant to be like an overture, like of the story, or if it was actually Gaston Leroux's like talking about it. I wasn't quite sure of where the line of that was. Because at first it sounded like he's just giving like facts, like yes, the opera ghost really existed, blah 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 blah. But then it kind of goes into more of a like flowery type of like embellishment that we actually see later in the book as well.
Mm-hmm.
So what was your thought about just the prologue? Was it actually Gaston Leroux talking to us, or was it just part of the story?
Well, that was one of the key questions I had at the start: is who is telling this story? Is it the author? Because it's very rarely the author I find in all books. It's some sort of omniscient presence that sits outside. You might have thought, it could have been, the Phantom could have been Raoul, could have been any of these characters in some way, but it's never really revealed throughout the story who the narrator is. So kind of got to take it to be omniscient in some way. But I think you hit on the idea, on the theatricalness of this quite a lot, between the floriness, between the overture, between the setting up of the scene. Get a lot of the themes out there earlier on, and we're going to explore them as we go through, because I think that idea of theatricality pervades the entire book the whole way through, even to the point that one section of dialogue is actually written in script between two characters, which is so odd. It only happens once in the entire book, and it sort of sticks out like a sore thumb. But I think it's a reminder. We'll make it later, but it's a reminder that this is a very, it's like a love letter to theater in its own right. And I think one of the things, like you said earlier on, you had experienced this as a young person. It strikes me, having spoke to people around the world, and although not everybody has access to theater.
Absolutely.
I live in a city that has 4 or 5 theaters in it. It's a very theater rich, drama led city, but I know an awful lot of people that have never experienced that at all. And the arts as a whole, probably over the past 100 years or so, have become much more accessible to everybody, whether that's film, music, art, and art seeker or otherwise. But theater is still sort of locked away in
Yeah.
these small buildings or otherwise, with these incredible productions. A couple of them get translated and made into films or otherwise, but by and large, they're changing the nature of what that is. And there's nothing quite like sitting in the small theater, especially in those Broadway theaters that you expect to be big and grandiose, but are actually very small and classic and very tight, and that they generate their own atmosphere. So I think much like that, the prologue sets to generate the atmosphere through use of language, through use of facts, and all that kind of stuff, and sort of set the theme, much as you said, like an overture. I really like that idea.
Yeah, and I definitely reading through this, it did kind of feel like a play, which I'm sure was the style of the time. And, I think at the time theater was so much more, I don't want to say accessible, it was probably a bigger cultural thing at the time, considering it was the early 1900s than it would be today.
Yeah.
Because obviously they didn't have technology, they didn't have like our level of technology now. And so really the storytelling aspect probably would have been more in theaters, and that would have been more of a thing to do rather than, it is today versus everybody just watching movies.
Yeah, it's probably a bit like the high school stories of what it is, because you probably got to imagine, especially in France and in Paris, that the theater was where social gatherings happened, especially of aristocracy or people of that thing.
Yeah.
So people who were reading this were going to say that theater, and it seems like a fairly accurate representation of what the theater looks like in terms of even the corridors and things underneath it. They would have been sitting watching those performances, kind of thinking, God, what's the story behind the story here? Because they only see the veneer or the front of that, what happens in the back, but what's the story of what happens backstage? And that sort of plays on the mind, I think, an awful lot, especially with the idea that that theaters are very superstitious places. We talk about the Scottish play and all of that kind of stuff.
Oh,
But
yeah.
yeah, but Leroux had based the story apparently on a couple of things like skull or dead bones found in the basement or in the catacombs
Mhm.
of that theater, etc., and the chandelier coming down and that kind of stuff. So they're based on a couple of events that happened, and he built the story around it, which I think plays on a lot of those kind of inherent theatrical themes.
I totally agree, and I think also what stood out to me mostly in theater is a lot of, like, the dialogue here, like, a lot of the exclamations, like, "Oh, Christine!" It sounds like something you would see in a theater, like that kind of overacted, reaching for, the cheap seats type of performance, and so I think that kind of it did a little bit feel like you were in the theater as well, like, just from the dialogue and how people were explaining things and, the asides and things like that and soliloquies, so I thought that was kind of interesting that it did feel like some you were in the theater, you know?
Yeah, very much
Yeah.
so.
So we start off, and basically everybody's in a tizzy about this opera ghost. And it's very interesting. It's literally an attention grabber, and that like all the like little chorus girls are running to the supervisor being like, it's the ghost, and they're laughing and joking. But there is kind of this like scary like undercurrent about is it the
Mm.
ghost? Is it not? So I thought that was a kind of interesting way to just start off the story. But what did you think, Chris?
Yeah, so I love the start of the story because it plays with this idea that it's the young chorus girls that's bringing, so it's in the minds of children, and ghosts are
Yeah.
often much more prevalent in the minds of children than they are the monster under the bed and all that kind of stuff. So when she's telling people about the ghost, especially people that aren't really involved, they're playing it off as a child's fantasy. And
Yeah.
you don't know enough, you don't know enough about the world to actually make sense of what you're seeing. It's not a ghost. There's a very rational explanation for what you're saying, and it pervades and makes its way through. Like, we don't hear from the other people at the start of the story that do know about the ghost, like Madame Geary, etc. She comes much later. So there were people around in the theater who gave much more credence to this idea, but we didn't see them for the first couple of chapters. So it sort of opens up from this child's eyes into something else, which for the reader, especially at the time, I'm sure must have been this thing with, well, this is a story or a superstition. We're going to get the real story, or is it a ghost? It kind of has that line. Which is it going to be? Are we going to have magical realism? Or are we going to have some sort of very rational explanation? Or what's going to happen here? And because of the way they introduced it and sort of opened it up, even to the point that he's basically sitting in the room with everybody at the stage, which is like the first time that people go, "Oh, this is an actual thing that's happening. This is a person that's here." It's all whispers and nods between different people that are there. So it's almost this idea of a legend that
Yeah.
is grown up, and legends often have some basis in fact, but they often get embellished and made much larger because of what they were. So I love the kind of the way that he took us into the story of being almost able to dismiss it, but much like the people in the story, kind of getting to a point where, oh, we need to take this a bit more seriously than what it originally appeared. What about yourself?
So I like that you said that it's almost through a child's eyes because I kind of saw this as a setup to like Christine's experience with the
Mm-hmm.
Phantom
Mm-hmm.
because at the beginning when Christine's like it's the angel of music, it's something almost very childlike and very pure about that. Like it's the ghost of my dead father or my dead father like sent the ghost for me just for me and it's got that very very childlike quality
It
of her
does.
believing in something. It's almost like Santa Claus, a really messed up Santa Claus. um, and so I think opening up that way, it's kind of like it's a ghost, and it's kind of that innocence about it that I
Mm-hmm.
think she experienced when she first met the Angel of Music. But then, as you said, it develops on like, oh, we have to take this a little more seriously, just as Christine's situation becomes much more serious and actually quite dangerous.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely.
yeah, so I do think it's a little bit of a setup about her experience a bit. Um, yeah, so I thought that was actually pretty cool that we just kind of like get into it. Um,
Yeah.
we are then introduced into, I think one of them is a count, and the other one is the Vicomte, Rao and his brother Philippe, I believe.
Yes. So he, yes, he's the second. in line,
Yeah.
I suppose, to it. But they're very much from the aristocracy and this idea, and we get an introduction to Raoul. And I don't know about you, but you don't like him instantly.
Yeah.
He is
I still don't
brash.
like
He's
him, and I
yeah. I think that's completely fair. I think he becomes best of a bad lot by the
yeah.
end of the end of the book. But he is brash. He's overconfident. He's very entitled, and I think a lot of that comes from his position and his space in life. He kind of expects people to jump and for him to get this girl who's well beneath him just by approaching her. And
Yeah.
kind of that rejection stings him to the point that he becomes again like a child. He's like a spoiled little boy crying on the floor, banging his fists against things. Why is this happening to me? Oh, woe is me. And we as the reader are going, get over yourself. This is
Yeah,
absolutely terrible.
exactly.
But I think it does go to show the kind of different levels within society that there were there. Obviously he was aristocracy. Christine was definitely of a lower class, but she was in an elevated position in certain society because of her ability to sing.
Yeah, and also her
And with that,
father's legacy too.
and her father's legacy.
Even though he struggled and he was financially poor, he was at least recognized as a great violinist, I believe. So
Yeah, and then to take it to the Phantom, who's literally living underneath the city in some ways.
yeah,
So he's the real underclass. So you get this kind of
yeah.
literally through the seats of the theater. So the people that are sitting high up in the seats onto the
Oh,
stage and then underneath.
I had not even thought about that. And oh, that's so good because the Vicomte would be in the box seat. She would be
He
on the
was
stage, and then Eric would be beneath the
on
stage. So
the
that's
stage.
really interesting.
And actually, later on, when he does declare when she gets abducted, he's at floor level.
Oh,
He's at the same
interesting.
level as her at that point, which
Yeah, that's
again I don't think is
interesting.
a coincidence.
Yeah. I also wonder, I don't know this for certain, but I have a thought that maybe the people who worked at the theater were sometimes not seen as within the story, like they seem to have a culture of their own, and
Hmm.
so they kind of seem to be like, I don't know, something about like, oh, um, he would go to her room and, like, he would sneak off and just go to her dressing room and something like that. It kind of felt a little like he's taking advantage a bit
Hmm.
of her kind of station in life, or you know what I mean? I don't know this for certain. I'd have to do more historical research. But it was kind of the impression about that what you're saying is that I'm entitled to go see Christine whenever I want, even though she's working. Or and it kind of seemed like there was kind of more of like a party atmosphere behind the scenes with some of this. So I do wonder if there was a little bit of that, is she a good girl? You know what I mean? He asked, like, is
Right.
she a good girl? He's kind of assuming. I felt like sometimes he was assuming things about her because she was working in the theater.
Interesting.
But I would have to do more research on that. I don't know that for a fact culturally or anything like that or historically, but I just
Well,
kind of picked up on that he was like, you know,
yeah, I wonder if that kind of harkens back to kind of our experience of kind of people who come up because there was always that thing for anybody to have made it in theatre or in the arts or otherwise of a female variety. They have had to sell their soul a little bit in some way
yeah.
along and actually that I think that's one of the themes that comes
Yeah,
out of
exactly.
this
Yeah.
with the angel and music, etc. That comes in there. But there is no doubt that he has the freedom, even in a place where he's not comfortable. You know, it's not his theatre. He's not part of the production, but he can walk freely throughout society and life. And she's behind a locked door. It's literally the only privacy that she has is in her own place, which he then invades numerous times throughout
Both of
the.
them do.
Yeah, well, that's suppose
Both
that's
of
true.
them. This is
Yeah,
horrible. I was horrified by that.
yeah. No privacy at all. But
Damn.
yeah, it's it's interesting that part of it, but also I think the exploration of competition within the people between Carlotta then and Christine,
Yeah.
and there is space for only one star of the show, so to speak,
Yeah.
and how that's manipulated. It's not went into a great lot of detail except for that kind of small moment, but you get the idea certainly.
Yeah. Totally. Totally. Um, what did you think about Christine overall? Because she's a very complex character,
Hmm.
and granted, when I got older and I revisited the story, my opinion about the character herself kind of changed, even through the Andrew Lloyd Webber, even through the
Hmm.
film adaptations, and especially in this book. But what was kind of your like thoughts about her as a character?
Yeah, she's a bit like Raoul. I mean, I don't think she's that great a catch. She is
Yeah.
kind of a bit
She's
facile.
kind of the problem a little bit. I hate to say this. Like we love her, we
Yeah,
want the best for her, but I feel like sometimes she's a little bit of the problem in the story.
yeah, she hasn't got an awful lot going about her apart from the fact that she can sing,
Yeah.
and you know, the Raoul's attraction to her is born of a time when they were young together and kids, but he obviously found her quite pretty at that stage anyway. So
Yeah.
it's for me, it's a very physical relationship for him. Like he's not attracted to anything else aside from
Yeah,
her
about
being
her.
some up at her, and he's sitting well in his arm or whatever else he wanted to look for that in her. And I love this, but we don't really get an exploration into what makes her special in
Yeah.
some ways, aside from her singing voice. And when her singing voice feels right, it actually is often implied in the story that when she wasn't a great singer, she
Yeah.
was very grey and nothing about her. It was really that kind of idea of being a great singer that elevated her in some way. And I sort of feel like that a bit of the character because she is incredibly easily manipulated throughout the
Yeah.
entire story,
Yeah.
isn't she? She
Yeah.
doesn't really fight back, except to the point that she becomes the ultimate hero because she's the one that does the self-sacrifice at the end
Yeah.
and shows the kind of what she's made of at that stage, say that there was something there, but the person that we see throughout the story, I don't think has that depth presented to us.
Yeah. I at first I'm kind At first, I'm kind of endeared to her because she did seem to have, like, that innocence, like, she lost her
Mhm.
father very young, that she kinda seemed like she lived a tough life, and so, like, this kind of, like, almost fairy tale idea of, like, "Oh, the angel of music's teaching me," and, like, kind of but then you realize how old she is too, you know what I mean? So it's a little like, "Okay," like, "Okay, you're really the angel of music, babe?" Like, Christine, I think we gotta have a chat here." So
Yeah.
but, it's kind of it's she's a hard character for me to kind of like as well because of that. Like, I do understand she probably has a lot of trauma about her father. She probably has a lot of trauma about her upbringing. Um, and, she does have this kind of like innocence that she kind of wants to believe in something or wants to believe like about her father's angel.
Mhm.
Um, but at the same time, then some of the like decisions and some of the like push and pull I feel like sometimes she kind of plays a little bit like with Raw.
Mm.
I don't know if that's just my skepticism shining through, but it kind of just seems like, yeah, it kind of seems like make up your mind, girl. Come on, let's have a spine. Let's get the show on the road here.
Yeah, I sort of thought that she wasn't able to take control of the situation herself. She couldn't fight against the Phantom. She didn't have the tools, and her inviting Raoul that time was her way of trying to see if he had a way out of it for her. But obviously, Erik has this thing of he plays with everybody.
Yeah,
He's intellectually smarter than them all for sure. And while he's a complete and utter sociopath psychopath, uh, in many ways, he is of a higher level of intelligence than them and would be able to play with them. And
yeah,
I think if she wasn't like that or he wasn't like that, I don't think this necessarily would have worked out quite as well. As it probably would have had to have been a 400, 500 page book. And that point, it's like, all right, well, I don't think we get the resolution as quickly as we need it as we do in this kind of stage. So it is an interesting comparison because Stephanie Christine has that innocent, demure style here. You can see why men would be attracted to her in that kind of doll-like way, but she's not exactly a great representation of a strong feminine character.
yeah,
Definitely not.
yeah. And maybe that's my own like because being a modern reader, there is just more like stronger female, you know, things like we have females that will like laugh at like people or they'll like play chess or something like that in literature. And this, I keep forgetting that this is probably 1900s. You know what I mean? Like that trope and that wasn't either popular or even really existent at that
Yeah,
point.
but
So
I
that's
think
all probably my own just sign of the times things.
but I think it's fair to say that Raoul's the same. There's really not about him. He wrote those two characters quite similarly in many ways in terms of their
Yeah,
substance of people. So while I would sort of agree with you that at Sign of the Times, etc., I think it was much more of a conscious effort from Leroux to kind of say, look, these two people are both pretty, have privilege, whatever else going on, but they don't have that depth of character that, or they're easily reduced to kind of one or two single issues for them.
Yeah, perhaps, perhaps. Um, yeah, and I mean, we do get like the story of, doesn't she have like a guardian or something
Yes,
that she, yeah,
Madam. Yes,
Madam
yes,
somebody, yeah.
yeah.
Um,
It goes away
a-
with them at the end. Yeah.
and something I kind of forgot is that I do think she kind of plays into this with Christine a bit. So that might have been a little bit of a stunt because she's like, "Didn't you tell her she's with the Angel of Music? She's with the Angel of Music all the time."
Mm.
And my skepticism says, "Oh, she's laughing at this." But then I'm also like, "No, maybe she also kind of believes in this." So maybe it's Christine just didn't have anyone to be like, "Girl, Angel of Music, really?" So I do think maybe that was at play too. But I just kind of discovered that in my head that there wasn't anyone to be like, "No." You know.
Yeah, she was literally led to live in her own grief for such a long time, and the presence of these two men, you can see why she probably would have latched on to at least the idea of them for
Yeah.
guidance or otherwise, especially with the Angel of Music kind of trope with, and then with him
Yeah.
retrieving her shawl or whatever it was when they were children.
Yeah, totally. Um then we have, do we want to talk about Eric, or I forget the Persian's name. He goes by the Persian.
We'll just go by the Persian. So
Persian. Let's do the Persian, then we'll save Eric for the,
yeah,
last
I can
character
do.
arc.
So I don't know if it was just me, but I think there was the implication that the person was hidden away for a lot of the story, if you know
Yeah.
what I mean, and sort of only came to the fore, and is another character with a the title on it. So it sort of implies that there's a link between him and the Phantom,
Yeah.
uh, quite quickly. Even outside of the fact that Christine points out and says, "Oh, Christine, or the Phantom and the Persian know each other," but you realize that there's some sort of deeper um, relationship there. Now, I'm not entirely convinced by the Persian character's presence in this story
Really? Unpack that.
because
I'm
he
curious about
is
that.
so absent for a lot of it. You know,
Yeah.
the chandelier crash and all that kind of stuff. He's almost like a MacGuffin in this story in order to fill in uh, plot points and give Raoul guidance. Now, to be fair, as I've just said, I think Raoul needed the guidance because he's
Yeah.
kind of useless.
Yep.
So having somebody else that's capable and of an intelligence level of the Phantom was probably needed as a buffer.
Okay, yeah. Yeah.
But in order to kind of get to his level or otherwise, but because there's no way Raoul would have found the trapdoor. Like,
No, he would have been dead like the first booby trap. Like,
oh,
let's
it's
be
too
honest.
warm.
It's
Oh,
gone. It's gone. Yeah.
take me. So I think it was needed, but I would have much preferred if it had been sort of visible much more prominently throughout the story and not just kind of towards the tail end of the story when all of a sudden he got a conscience and was willing to do anything to take on the Phantom at that stage. I mean, there was a dead body at that stage. I think that's one of the things that really stuck out to me as I got to the end of the book was murder happened here, like, and nobody really seemed to care that
Yeah.
much. And it's almost like it was almost like Rue was kind of pointing back out to us. Remember that the Phantom probably killed this person. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's like, oh, you might feel bad for him, but also he's a murderer.
So it's like the person only got a conscience towards the end. That's sort of what I felt. Now he's a fun character because I think we get to see the tail end of the story, and a lot of the resolution of the story comes through the person's eyes, and it comes to one of my things about that we're told an awful lot about the end, but not shown the end, which kind of
Yeah.
leads to another element of mystery. So I did like him as a narrative device, but I just didn't like the way he felt sort of tacked on. It felt like Leroux got to the end of the story and went, over it myself into a corner here. I need something
Yeah.
else, or I need somebody
He's
else to put
like,
in here.
Rao can't do this on his own. Poor
Indeed.
man needs some help.
Yeah.
He
What
needs a
about you?
third. It's almost like the third man syndrome a little bit, that there is somebody, else helping Rao out.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. It kind of, it weirded me out a little bit that they almost seemed like friends, him
Yeah.
and Eric. Um, but at the same time, it's like, what have you been doing this entire time? You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, again, just as like no one said to Christine, "Girl, there's no Angel of Music. Like, this is
Mm-hmm.
a problem." It's kind of like you didn't say. You probably saw exactly what was going on with this with Eric, and like you didn't say like maybe we should think about this, or like, you know what I mean? It just kind of felt like you guys are buddies, you hang out, like it was a little odd for me.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, but yeah, I personally didn't too much care for um having him into it. I think it would have been a little more interesting, kind of like how Andrew Lloyd Webber did it, where it was just the three of them, and
Yes.
like, Rao fighting to like get her versus like having that crutch of the Persian.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so yeah, I could kind of take it or leave it for the
Yeah.
Persian, to be
It's
honest.
an interesting point about the theatrical version, because I think, especially in the theater, second acts, it's almost just about getting the resolution in the theater. I often think that just about every musical theater thing you ever seen, the climaxes up to the midpoint. The big song happens just before the interval, and then everything after that is sort of unpicking and resolving that. Whereas in a book, you have to ramp up very much towards the end,
Yeah,
and it has to go up and it has to make sense. And if it's not earned in a book, you tend to be very dismissive of the book. Whereas in a musical theater, especially, it's much more about the highs and the rapture as comes out in this story a little bit.
all right, that's fair enough. Yeah, it's fair. Um, for our next group, I'm gonna group a couple of them, and then we'll get to
Mm-hmm.
fandom. We have the two new managers and Madame Giry, which I don't know about you, but I feel like this was the comic relief
Yeah.
of the entire, yeah, good. And I was kind of interested about how they portrayed Madame Giry too. Like again, my first was the Andrew Lloyd Webber, so she
Mm-hmm.
seemed to be kind of this more like statuesque, like teacher type of thing, this like strict one. And the character was wildly different in the story here. So what did you think about those three characters, Chris?
So the two new managers are two idiots. They seem to make realizations about a week and a half after they needed to. But again, like you say, I think it's a bit of comic relief. Even the whole thing with the safety pin, the way that was framed and done, they kind of introduced, everything's happening. Christine's went missing, and they eventually get to the door and says, "Have you got a safety pin?" And I think they're a pretty good representation for people that are not interested in the theater; they're interested in the money.
Yeah.
And that was pretty much,
Yeah.
I think probably a criticism of how people were treating the arts even back in 1910. This
Hmm.
idea that people, rather than being interested in creating art and supporting art and using art for the good of society, it was being taken over by people who were only interested in how they could make a bit of money. They didn't care about the people working there or anything. It was just of that way. And especially when it came to their treatment of people that worked in the theater, because they fired Madame
Mm,
Curie without really
mm.
any due cause, other than the Phantom's kind of intercedence there, she never would have been back at all. So they're portrayed as two idiots that really have
Yeah.
no place in society,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Totally.
certainly within this society. And Madame
Eh,
Geary is, sorry, go ahead.
no, and I was gonna say then that's kind of interesting because we have this, and then we also have like somebody like the Phantom who is living and breathing art.
Yes,
Like art just running through his veins. That's the only thing that
absolutely.
he thinks about. Versus them, they're like, okay, well, where's my 20,000 francs? So
Hmm.
I just thought that was an interesting juxtaposition. But yes,
Yeah,
Madame Giry.
Madame Geary is again quite. She is. I can see why they portrayed her as stoic, in kind of in that kind of way, because she's almost. It doesn't matter to her what's happening, and she's just doing her job. She's just doing her bit, and she takes people as they treat her, which an
Yeah.
awful lot of people do. So because the Phantom treated her well, I mean, she didn't really like him or anything, but she was more inclined to be positive towards him.
Yeah.
He was more gentlemanly and more of a compelling character for her, a person, than any of the new managers at all. And I do think the whole scene with the safety pin and how they exchange the money and all that kind of stuff fits perfectly within the book, because when that first section started off, I was like, who cares? Like, there's a missing woman here, that people are
Yeah.
in danger and all the rest of it, but it was perfect for just kind of being a springboard for what was then quite a lengthy, running towards the end, where it was quite dark and there was, characters under great risk, etc. So she was a nice way to have an interface between the Phantom and other people, so that you know it was needed, because again, it came from the child's eyes, and Madame Geary is the other person that was very sure of the presence You know, for Christine, he lived in the walls. He was a voice for Raoul. He was a voice that he heard in the room, but she was very aware that he was there. So it gave it legitimacy there.
Yeah.
So her character had a purpose.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that's also why he was a little endeared to her because he does have a lot of trauma about like his appearance and how people treat him and things like that. And so for her to like go, I mean, obviously, like, doing business with someone you're not seeing and like doing their bidding, like you really have to accept something for how it is. You know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
she wasn't freaked out about like, oh, take this envelope or like here's money. She wasn't freaked out by that. And I think he respected her because of it. You know what I mean? Even though on the surface that would have freaked a lot of people out. You know what
Yeah,
I mean? So
and
kind of like his
yeah,
appearance.
and he gave gifts to her in much the same way as you would give flowers to the performer or something on stage. Even though the other people were paying her wages, so to speak, she didn't see that as over and above.
No.
Whereas the gifts were.
Yeah. So I do think there was like a quiet like understanding between them, which was I
Yeah,
liked. I thought that was cool. I have
yeah.
to say one of the funniest things in this now there's not a lot of humor in
Hmm.
this book or not a lot of overt humor, but I thought one of the like scenes that actually made me giggle was when uh, Christine went missing and they're talking to like the commissioner or I think it's the commissioner of police, right?
Hmm.
And Rouse there is like, it was the opera ghost. And the commissioner just turns, he's like, do you got an opera ghost on the present? Like I have to
Yeah,
ask these questions. And it's like, I don't know why, but that line just made me laugh so much. And then he's like, I think everybody's, needs to go to the asylum here, or he said something
yeah.
like that, like the lunatic, he was like in the company of lunatics or something. I don't know why, but I thought that was funny as heck. Like just that, like, do you got an opera ghost on the premise? Like,
It was
okay,
almost Naked Gun-esque. I think I read that as very much
yeah,
so like Leslie Nielsen kind of coming in because he's there for such a short amount of time.
yeah,
The inspector that you kind of go, okay.
yeah. It's like, and I don't know if it was just like the tone or something, or like it was the opera ghost. Do you
There's a
have an
little
opera
bit of
ghost
levity.
on the and it was just so official, but also like I have to ask this. It was hilarious. It was the
Yeah,
funniest thing for me. So that actually made me giggle. So that was one of my favorite lines.
yeah.
So I think it is time to talk about Eric. And this might
Mm,
go out because he is one of the most complex characters in literature, theater,
yeah.
I think, really ever written. So Eric, goodness.
Mm,
So, okay. What did you like before we kind of knew who Eric was? And I know you had you went to see the Broadway show, so let's
mhm,
just
yep.
forget about that. Before we kind of knew about Eric, we knew about the opera ghost.
Mhm.
What was your kind of your impressions before the reveal was? Like, did you think it was an actual ghost, or like would you think it was an actual ghost, or do you think it would be benevolent, or
Well,
what was your kind of like
yeah,
before the reveal?
like I said before, it was definitely playing on the idea of the mysticism versus the realism. What was actually happening here. I can't disassociate myself with the fact that I knew it was a person going
Yeah.
on to read the novel. But I think regardless of how I feel, the sense for the first kind of 3 or 4 chapters, even including the death of Joseph, whatever second name was, you get the
Bouquet, I
sense that
think.
yeah, you get the sense that the Phantom or Eric is playful in nature.
Mm,
He's having fun with people. It's almost like he's exerting his superiority over people in a playful way and in a way that kind of like I often really like reading intelligent characters. Intelligence is
yeah.
one of my funnest things to read, especially when people show how fun they are. And he has a flair for the theatrical, even at the start. Like even when he writes his letters, he writes them in red, sort of indicating that it's blood, which also is like a portent for danger, etc. as well. So there were signs written in there that maybe he wasn't just this playful kind of jokerish
Yeah,
type.
Red Death. He went to the thing as Red
Yeah, the
Death. I
Mask of Red
mean,
Death. Yeah, yeah, indeed. So there was loads of that kind of stuff, but his menace only comes about later because at the start he's very much that playful character, and he's somebody that's seen as helping Christine.
yeah,
He's made her a fantastic singer and all of that kind of stuff. So it's only as we make our way through that we that certainly my thoughts of Erik became darker. You know, a
Yeah.
realization that actually there was more going on here, and it is about the time that he goes from being a ghost, I could be a mystical creature, to having a name of Erik, because
Mm,
the naming of him humanizes him just by
yeah.
having a name. And it's around that stage that I think Leroux kind of very purposely kind of steps back and goes, actually, let's look at that. If this is a person now, a man, is he good, benevolent, or malevolent? You know, which one is it at that stage? And that's where the real exploration and the complexity of his character. You know, what is seen as playful at one moment is seen as incredibly controlling,
Yeah.
in another way manipulative. You know, and
Yeah.
he's really toying with people rather than being playful with them. And it just shows you the fine line. I think when you have a character like that, that you write them a certain way, and I think he did such a masterful job of that.
I agree. I think this is probably one of the greatest characters that's ever been written. Um, Something I just kind of realized is I think it's interesting that this is done in a theater,
Mhm.
and maybe this is a very obvious observation, I'm not sure, but it's kind of interesting that he's operating the people he he's watching a theater, but it's their real lives, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
While they're, like, superimposing performances out for audiences, it's kinda like he's manipulating the performances behind scenes, and it's like
Yeah.
his theater, you know what I mean? Which I know is the thing, but I thought it was just kind of interesting that the setting is a theater, and he really is kind of, like, directing things like these real people are a theater in the story, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? So
I wrote that exactly in my notes about chapter 18. The end of chapter 18. Not only does he live in the theater, but he is the theater. Like he
yeah.
literally is the function of the theater. His whole life is the theatrical nature of it. It is moving and manipulating pieces. It's listening to make sure he doesn't miss anything in terms of words spoken in corridors and all of that kind of stuff. Everything's designed about him. He embodies the theater and top to bottom. And again, I my exact words were, "This is probably really obvious at this stage," but that's nearly exactly what you said there, Jane, as well. Yeah,
Yeah, it's like the real people's reaction is his theater
mhm,
experience, you
yeah,
know what I mean? And, like,
yeah,
let's drop a body somewhere, see what happens, or like,
exactly.
oh, they're about this note and it's you know what I mean? So, I just thought that was kinda funny. I thought that was interesting. That's something I hadn't
Hmm.
picked up on until till now, so I thought that was cool.
Yeah.
So, I struggle a little bit with Eric, as a character too. I struggle with everybody, okay, to be honest. I just struggled with this book. But which is funny considering it's my favorite story, but still, whatever.
Yeah.
We're gonna forget that. But I think I struggle with it because I'm not really sure how obviously probably with Eric itself, this from his perspective, this never was good. You know what I mean? This was a controlling thing, this was a possession thing, this was, you know so in that way I see that his like play of the angel of music with her is incredibly negative, like horrible. There's
Mhm.
no like helping her in her grief. There's no like, comfort. It's more of like I'm helping you with comfort because I want to be with you in the long term. So I really kind of struggle with this dynamic that he I personally think he's been, like, manipulating everything from the very start, and there really wasn't, like, any softness there. There wasn't really
No.
any love or comparison or compassion or anything like that. Um, so that kinda colors my entire thing. And honestly, the vitriol towards the end, like, or, when she, like, unmasks him and, like, this kind of idea that even somebody that he's claiming to love with all of his heart, he's gonna be incredibly mean to in some ways because he
Mhm.
has a lot of trauma. I think that makes him a incredibly dark character. I think it's a very interesting character. I'm so interested because there seems to be lot of people online who's like, "Oh, I actually really like Eric. Oh, yes, he's hurt, but, Eric, deserved Christine." But I'm like, reading it like this, I'm like, "Nah, there's no way. There was no way that any of this was gonna be good."
Yeah,
What do you think?
I actually think in the end, I think Eric comes to the realization that he wasn't good enough for
Yeah.
Christine. I think that's kind of, if that seems to be believed, I think that's literally the point of that. And I think you're really spot on in the idea where you talk about his kind of idea of love. He
Yeah.
really doesn't have a concept of love because he's never received it in his entire life. And I think that's the one point where I wouldn't say started to like him or have sympathy with, but you understand him a bit more towards the end when he starts to talk
Yeah.
about how his mother treated him. He has this idea of almost like a parental child relationship, one that is control and coercion and stuff.
Yeah.
You've got to get them to do that. And he thinks that's what love is. So when he's manipulating everything to happen with Christine for her to love him, I mean, he does it knowing that actually his physical appearance is he's masking that literally in some ways. He's doing all those things so that she falls in love with him as a person and then he can reveal himself. And that's why the shock of when he does take the mask off and she kisses him and doesn't flinch, etc. I think there's like a realization that for him, love is actually something very different than physical
Mm.
appearance or anything else. Like I think there's an understanding that comes with his character at that stage that I think he realizes for all of his intelligence and all his manipulation, he didn't understand love and what love was,
Yeah.
and what
I think
that
that
took. And I think that's such a powerful resolution at the end because, as you say, just before the last thing we see, he's lost the plot. He has been trying to control her and he can't control her to the point that she's willing to give up her own life for that control that he has over her because of her love for somebody else. And he's just driven mad with, like, he's literally going to blow up the entire city if he can't get his way, which
yeah.
is a reflection of Raoul kind of stamping him and being very
Yeah.
unhappy at the start of the thing. So,
Like I
like,
said, none of these guys were good for her. I'm sorry. There were no good options here, in my
all
opinion.
men are bad, but that
I didn't
idea
say
of
that. I didn't say that.
I did. um, it's telling that Erik only comes to that realization when he's near death. He'd been a good man for the last 10 days of his life or whatever it was, 3 weeks, wasn't it? Something like that.
Something like that.
But that makes him a very complex character because we he doesn't understand why he's doing certain things and he doesn't understand how to do it right. He's lived a solitary life. His where he lives, he's taken all mirrors and everything away from it so he doesn't have to come to that reality. He has never really spent time in himself. He's just sort of manipulating and pulling the strings of everybody else around his life so that they know he's there. So all
Yeah.
those little power plays that he's doing is that people talk about the phantom or the ghost, and that is his existence. But actually, anything outside of it, he doesn't know what to do because it's not in his comfort zone. He has no experience of what to do in that case.
Yeah. I also think talking about his kind of superior intelligence in relation to everybody else here,
Yeah,
I do think that that is an interesting thing because he's probably much even with the face, like being like that intelligent is probably very, very lonely. You know what I
hmm,
mean? Like there's not a lot of people that can design theaters, there's not a lot of
yeah,
people that can do magic tricks, there's not a lot of people that can escape death or cause death, you know what I mean? So
absolutely.
I do think much less I think the physical, like the face is kind of a manifestation of people not being able to relate to
Yeah,
that, and it's not just the physical appearance, it's more of his intelligence, you know what I mean, and his trauma,
yeah,
and so I do think, mm, even though the physical appearance is kind of like the personification of that, and I think it's a little bit more of, like, having this high extreme intelligence at the time was probably extremely lonely,
yeah.
you know what I mean?
But there really isn't too many other people in the story that are on his level. The inspector doesn't show it. None of the
Nope.
managers do. It's only really the Persian towards the end, and even then, we're showing that he is the better of the Persian at
Yeah,
that level. So we don't get this really head-to-head intellectual confrontation. The way that Leroux gets around it is he makes him deal with the other sides of life, which he isn't as so proficient and doesn't understand with, and deal with people on that level. So Christine and Raoul are way more emotionally mature than he is and
yeah,
emotionally intelligent. So he hasn't realized that there's different modes of intelligence in that
yeah,
way, which was what makes this book for me kind of great, is because it's not really about a ghost. It's not really about the playfulness. It's about people, and it's about people not understanding themselves. And whether Christine dies or lives is kind of neither here nor there for me.
yeah, yeah, um, speaking about the theme of love,
Mm.
and we might have talked about this a little
Mhm.
bit, but I think one of the really, really interesting parts of this is that this idea of the definition of love. Now, with the Phantom, love is very possessive. It's very
Mhm.
controlling. It's something that I have, you know what I mean? Versus there's this idea of like giving love. But for me, like I get, Rao's supposed to be the giving love one, like a new, life, all about Christine, saving Christine, great. But I actually don't, I just kind of see them both as a little bit more of a possessive love too. You know what I mean? So it just happens for me that Eric's is way more toxic than Rao. So I think what do you think about that? This idea of like possessive love versus, I don't know what you call it, pure love, maybe? I don't know what the opposite of
Um,
that would be. Healthy love?
yeah, well, love is supposed to be a positive emotion, right? I
Mhm.
think in general, it's supposed to be something that is supposed to be good for you. But things like possession and control are very negative things. And actually, while one person may feel love because of the possession of the control, on the other side, it's not reciprocated, so therefore it doesn't become binding and true in that stage. It just
And then is it
becomes.
even love?
Yeah, well, that's exactly the point. Then is but they neither of these two men, I think, really understand love. Now, what I will say is that Raoul has this sense at the time of sacrifice for his love. He's prepared to give up his life, and Eric comes that later. Um, but it's only really Christine that is really willing to do it kind of the whole way through, if that makes
Yeah.
sense. So she's the only person that actually does love, I think, and understand love at that way. Uh, but it could also be wrapped up in the fact that she actually received true love from her father,
Yeah.
and through
Yeah,
that way.
that's right. And
She understands that in ways, in the same way as he told her about the angel of music to comfort her when she was a young child,
yeah, that
knowing
makes
that,
sense.
that kind of idea, I'll always be there for you, even when I'm not here. And the fact that you'll always have comfort and safety in me, and comfort and safety being positive things, aspects of love rather than the controlling and all of that kind of stuff.
I like that. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense because I did forget that she did have a good relationship with her father at the time, and that kind of is like maybe a role model type of thing even for
Yeah,
her, you
indeed.
know what I
Yeah.
mean? So, and also, like, again, this is early 1900s. The idea of her marrying Rao and Rao being a higher class and marrying somebody who would be considered lower class is probably at the time a sign of love too, because I don't know this historically, I'm just kind of making a
Mhm.
guess here about, like, my impressions, but the idea that he would marry below his class when he had all these options and probably was very financially stable and marrying a chorus girl, as, I think she's been referred to at the earlier on, um, or in the Andrew Lloyd Webber one, I think at least, probably would have been, like, seen as a type of self-sacrifice too, in a very odd social way.
Yeah, the aristocracy probably didn't marry for love very often.
Yeah,
That was the
yeah,
thing. Having read Anna Karenina and things like that, it was very much you found a suitable partner of the same class, and you grew to love that person over time. They had to kind of solidify your status in society. They had to do that, and you can actually see that within royalty or otherwise here. That's still the case. Those people
yeah.
don't meet people and fall in love the way conventional and normal people do, in the middle classes or otherwise. So yes, you can actually see that through the Raoul's brother. He's so
Yeah,
opposed to this, to the point that it cost him his life. In some ways, he couldn't let this happen because it was going to be the ruination of Raoul, to fall through with marrying this essentially
yeah.
singer in the opera, which many of us, I think, in today's society would look at that and go, "God, it's a hell of a status in society." We're talking about pre-celebrity in a lot of ways,
Yeah.
and that kind of stuff. So, and you can actually see like that kind of thing then played out with Prince Rainier and Monaco marrying Grace Kelly, for instance.
Mhm.
Many years later, that pretty much that exact thing did happen, and it didn't become more commonplace till many years later. But in 1910, it would have been very much against the grain, and as you say, probably a sign of marrying for true feelings rather
Right.
than kind of like expectation.
Right, and I do think in the regards of this story, that could have been a sign of love,
Yeah.
that he's kind of going against his brother, he's going against, like, convention for this feeling. So, again, my perspective of this is a little warped from modern times, but I do
Mhm.
think if we're looking at it in that context, that whether that's giving love, that would technically be a form of giving love, is that
Yeah,
he's kind of going against his
yeah,
pedigree in a way.
yeah. Well,
I don't know.
he's given something up to be with her,
Yeah,
in
exactly.
some way.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
there's a self-sacrifice element to that, if nothing
Mhm.
else.
So, another really, really interesting aspect of this book is this idea of, does Eric's and his relationship with Christine actually represent grief rather than possession and controlling and whatever type of romantic, aspects to it. Um, I see this book a little bit as a play on grief versus embracing like a future.
Okay.
And the reason why I say that is because there are these very, like, polar opposite male characters. We have Raoul, who is a bright future for Christine, money, status, love, if we wanna go that far. Um, and life with Eric would be literally underground, in the dark, soulfully painful, with all of these ups and downs and, like, the music and, like, how intense the music is and how intense he is, controlling and dark and giving up something. So I actually kind of see this as a bit of a metaphor of her letting go of the grief of her father too,
Mm.
and that, like, because the Phantom also is playing this angel of music, like, "I am the angel, I was the one sent by your father." By her, like, and this kinda gets squashed in her decision, but, let's
Mhm.
roll with it. By her, like, choosing him or, like, being with him or, kind of just this whole, like, situation is more about her still living in her grief and choosing the grief because she's is deep into it, versus Rao's a little, if she chose Rao, it would be more like, "Okay, that part of my life is done, and I'm moving on into something a little bit brighter." But what would you think about that, Chris?
So I think you made a lot of very good points there in terms of Eric's kind of attitude and how he uses the memory of her father to woo her, for want of a better word, because he psychologically abuses the fact that she is grieving and uses that
Yeah.
against him, because and essentially, and I made this note at the time, when he takes on the persona of the angel of music, he is literally saying to Christine, I'm a proxy for your father, I am your father.
Yeah.
And she's not so much choosing love in that regard, she's choosing companionship and to live in the present still of her father, who she's very much grieving for at that stage, rather than kind of moving on. She still sees herself as a child. And interestingly enough, of course, Raoul plays in the similar sort of time period of her life to try and wear as well, that kind of retrieving of the shawl when they're very, very young girls. So he knows that he's sort of playing on the same time of her life when she's kind of reminiscing about her father. Her father is very much an important milestone in her life and person in her life, in a way that she doesn't have anymore. So yes, that this use of grief, it's one of the things that really turns his character from playful, all of that kind of stuff, to being dark, because he really goes into that side of his personality in order to really start torturing her. There's that
Yeah.
chapter that's called "Let the Torture Begin," and it's not the two people within the chamber itself that are getting tortured. It's Christine on the outside getting psychologically tortured by
Yeah.
Erik. That's actually what that chapter is about, which I think is a really interesting kind of juxtaposition of kind of theme and plot, in its own way. So you see the kind of horribleness, and we as the reader, I think, start to feel that quite early, and it's why an awful lot of the sympathies towards Erik just turn to go, look, there's nothing real about this. It's
Yeah.
all kind of in her head, and the idea of the rapture, even the use of when they're in the graveyard, um, the tune he plays is Lazarus,
Yeah. The
and
man from the
Lazarus, of
dead.
course, it says rise the man rising from the dead. So again,
Yeah.
incredibly manipulative, even in terms of the writing of Leroux, like that's not an accident in any way. He's kind of just reinforcing the idea that he's playing on her dead father as being a representation and an embodiment of him at that stage.
Yeah. Yeah, it's and I think that's where we kinda lose Eric because or we kind of lose I don't wanna say, like, favor of Eric, because even, like, at the end when he's like, "Oh, my mother never showed me love, like, I, lived in this" I
Mhm.
don't know what they call it. It was a circus or something?
Yeah,
Or,
he
he
was
was
in
like
Romania. Yeah, he was in Romania, and he
yeah,
was
ye
traveling with the traveling circus and stuff, yeah.
yeah, exactly, or, like and that was probably a very tough life, and
Yeah,
interesting enough, they actually seem to have he and Christine probably seem to have, like, similar tough lives versus
yeah,
Rao. You know what I mean? So like I thought that was kind of interesting that, in their own way, Christine losing her father, like kind of being this chorus girl until she like gets her fame. And then him obviously having a much tougher life with the ridicule and,
yeah,
all the bad things. But it's kind of interesting that it almost seems like he can appreciate that she has similar trauma in a way.
yeah.
And
But
maybe he's
they're
trying to, yeah,
bonding, aren't they? They're bonding together, and
yeah,
he he's sort of living in grief in his own way as well,
yeah,
because he sort of wants
exactly.
to take her away and hide the two of them away forever. Like, it's not as if he wants to then come out into society and kind of reveal themselves as this couple. He literally just wants to live in a dungeon with no light and no mirrors and no reflection of who they are and all of that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's a very dark and bleak future. Her in more ways than one.
And right next to the torture room, right? Where
Yeah,
yeah, so that was yeah, I don't know. Um,
horrible.
yeah, that was really bad. Um, we talked about mysticism versus reality,
Hmm.
right? So we already talked about that.
Yeah. So
Um,
one I want to bring up is the use of rapture. Now, I've talked about it a
okay,
couple of times, but it happens a couple of times within the story, and it's used as both a narrative device and a way to tell the story, but also as a way to influence the characters. So it happens. The first time it really happens is when they're at the graveyard and Lazarus is being played. Christine has this out of body experience that basically is showing the connection between her and her father, even though we know it's Erik playing the piece of music, and it builds to such a crescendo. Like, a lot of the language starts to become very florid, a bit like we were talking about in the prologue. So the language becomes more florid, becomes more emotional, and you're kind of swept up to this big climax at the end of the chapter, and then obviously, end scene, etc. It happens again just before um she's kidnapped on the stage
oh
before
yeah,
everything
that's
goes
right.
out. Exactly the same thing happens, and she's sort of caught in this swell in the stream of her singing and thing that happens, which is very like what happens in the theater, etc. In those big pieces, everybody in the auditorium gets caught up in the swell of emotion that's tied around that singular performance, and these things mirror each other. But for her, it's an emotional connection to her father or the piece or whatever else is going on, to the fact that she loses who she is at that moment, and she's susceptible to suggestion, she's susceptible to things that are going to happen to her. And like I say, this happens constantly throughout throughout the book, and it is this kind of idea that you can make poor decisions for yourself based on how you're being manipulated or the
Yeah,
circumstances in which you find yourself. Could be you on a night out, having danced, having too much to drink, and you've just been caught in the moment and things happen or whatever. It's a very similar kind of idea to that, and Eric certainly uses those situations, especially when he goes to the abductor, to basically heighten the drama of the whole thing, everything going black and she's gone, and the uproar that comes from the crowd. He couldn't have done it at the 15 minutes into the play. It wouldn't have been as effective. You do it at the end, everybody's on their feet, and then you have people emotionally kind of charged already within the theater. Even Raoul's jumping up and shouting all over the theater and all that kind of stuff. So the use and the way that that's written and presented to us, I just think made some of those events even more great in my mind.
yeah, and I also think this idea that it kind of gives a little bit of credence that she's able to kind of experience that as well because there's again 1900s totally different
Mhm.
landscape and this idea that she may not be able to experience that rapture like regularly in society and this is kind of like a way for her to kind of trap into like a true self in a way you know what I mean especially as a woman So I thought that was kind of interesting too, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, and then we
Yeah.
can also talk about whether or not, other people are trying to manipulate that for their own gain as well. So
Well, she's not experiencing it through relationship or love. I mean,
true,
that's the truth. Again, that contrast to
true.
how
That is
people
true.
live their lives and what happens to them, etc. So I think that's I think it's really interesting how that's almost like a climax or otherwise that happens. But she's experiencing it through music or through manipulation of music or otherwise, but not through actual genuine emotion.
Right, exactly. I think that's really interesting. I had not thought of
Mm,
that.
yeah.
Um, Another thing I kind of just put together too is when you were talking about like the mysticism versus the reality, and we
Mhm.
talked about, this idea of um Erik being like, "Oh, the opera goes," kind of almost like cutesy about it. And then actually the reality is
Mhm.
borderline psychopath character. Um, the idea that he wears a mask too, it kind of delves into that as well. It's a very real, like,
Mhm.
physical idea because, like, the mask is, like, intriguing. It's like, "Oh, why is he wearing a mask?" You know what I mean? What's under it? But then when he takes it off, it's the actual horror of
Yeah.
his appearance within the story. So I think that's kind of interesting too that we talk about, like, the reputation, we talk about, his own motives, but then there actually is a very physical representation of this. That's his entire character.
Yeah. Well, that's exactly which is more scary. The kind of mysticism or the idea of a ghost or the fact that it could be haunted or the reality of this character who has a mask but when he takes it off is horrific looking. Um, which that and actually as it turns out, probably more horrific to Erik than anybody else actually that is running because you get the initial shock, but he's been living with this entire life and has been hiding from who he is as a person and not kind of putting himself out there in any way.
Totally, totally.
Mhm.
Is there anything else we want to talk about with this book? I
Yes,
know
the
I feel
ending.
like yes, the ending.
So what
That's
happened at
right,
the end?
that's right. I forgot about the ending, I'm gonna be honest. Sorry.
So what do you think
Um,
happens at the end?
are we talking about, like, the torture room and the,
Beyond that,
like,
so
grasshopper or what are we talking about?
the
Well, hold on, let me back up. What
okay.
did you think Christine was gonna pick in the grasshopper versus
Oh, the
scorpion thing?
grasshopper for the scorpion.
Yeah,
See, I think that was a representation of her as a character. She couldn't.
yeah,
The kind of her lack of strength of character. She literally couldn't do it. She needed somebody else to pick it for her because she was racked with either making the wrong choice and her being responsible for that. Kind of, I don't think she could have coped with that or got over that. She could deal with the consequences no matter how bad that they came, but I think she needed somebody to take charge of that moment, um, to do that for her. That's sort of what I felt about it.
What do you think she would I mean, obviously we know what happened, but what did you think she was gonna pick?
I don't really know, to be honest. I think her actions later on suggest that she was always going to do the right thing. She was not self-serving. I think her actions afterwards showed that she could actually make peace with that quite quickly. The fact that she was going to give up her own happiness for the greater good. So I've got to imagine that she was going to save all of Paris and sacrifice her love because in a sort of way her love with Raoul wasn't actually real at that stage anyway.
Yeah.
It was sort of a promise. It was the kind of thing that they could have done. They could make
Yeah, like, they
plans.
played engaged for, like
Yeah,
yeah,
indeed. So
yeah,
sort of flirted with it in a lot of ways, but it wasn't actually real. It wasn't like they had been together for years and they'd
yeah.
been ripped apart at that point. It was a promise that was unlikely, and society was basically going to say, "No,
Oh.
you can't be together." Even if she picked a different choice, it mightn't have worked out at the end.
Do you think Christine loved Erik?
I'm not sure Christine loved Raoul, so
That's true, I don't think Christine loved everybody, I don't think
Um, she loved her dad. I mean, that's pretty much.
yeah,
No, I
sure.
don't think. I don't think she did, but I do think that she probably understood him better than he understood himself, and I think for him that's a bit
That was
a
as
big a
close
thing
as
as
you're gonna get?
yeah,
Yeah,
as close as he was going to get, and the fact that she was a good enough person that she could see past the horror of the mask or other that kind of stuff. She could see that actually, if they had had more time together with just the two of them, she probably would have changed him for the better
Mm.
actually, regardless of whether
Really?
she loved him or not.
I don't
Well,
know.
I think her maybe her not having the freedom might have made the difference, but I think there's evidence
Yeah.
to suggest that she
Like,
was
if
a
they were
positive
an
influence
average
on him.
couple,
Yeah.
like, yeah, they could yeah, totally. See, I see this going one of 2 ways. I either see that where if they were able to she was able to, like, integrate him into
Hmm.
society and, like, accept him and, like, yeah, they could have probably lived happily ever. But on
Legitimacy
the
there.
flip side of that, I don't think necessarily that Eric had the capability of that. And I personally think that, the kinda like verbal, like, assaults here and the, like, possessiveness and the controlling and he's very happy with the lasso, to be honest, like,
Yeah.
and I think
I'm
I think it would have been a drain on her, unfortunately. I don't think
I'm
it would
one of
have
those
worked
people that always like to see a path to redemption for people.
out.
Just
See,
one of those
I'm
things,
not.
right? Everybody has got to have a way that they can be better in
Yeah,
life. People are often not the fixed thing that they are at one point in their life and
yeah,
all
no,
that kind of stuff.
I do agree with that. I think for someone as diabolical as Eric, I don't
Oh
think
yeah.
there was any silver lining here, you know?
Well, that sort of leads on to the end. So what I mean by the end is the
There
conversation
we
with the
go.
Persian when he kind of tells him what happened.
Yeah, so, like, what remind me again, what exactly
So
happened? Because at this point, I was a little zonked out with the story.
So he said to the Persian when they were together for a while, and he eventually let Raoul go
Ah, yes, that's right.
because he could see her self-sacrifice, and he took his mask off, and she kissed him on the head and all that
Oh,
kind of
yeah,
stuff, and
and,
and
like, their
he
tears mixed or
yeah,
something,
yeah,
and so,
exactly
like, they
right,
became one.
she wasn't repulsed by him, and he realized actually what true love meant, and the fact that she would never love him, but she would be with him forever because that was an act of true love was the self-sacrifice to say, look, you save the man that I love, and I will be with you forever. Without I'll not. There was no flinching or not, and he decided to let the two of them go away, and that he was going to be dying soon. And the Persian would put the advert in the paper to say Erik is dead, and then she would come back and put the ring. And he says he
Yeah.
found the ring and he put the ring on, right?
Yeah, I did like that, I thought that was nice. It's like, "I didn't forget about you," you know?
But did that happen?
Yeah, true. Yeah, probably not.
He's a master manipulator kind of thing. He
Probably
may
not,
have
yeah,
just
there you
had.
go.
He probably wore the ring and died with it by himself, and he killed the two of them. Is just equally as likely.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And his redemption was now that he'd killed the woman that he loved, that he got to tell the story and set up his own epiphany, so to speak.
Well, what happened to the whole, like, redemption thing that you were just talking about, Chris? This
I'm
wasn't
just
very,
saying,
like
it depends on which version you believe. I think one of it's like one of those classic things. He does it full circle at the end. He then gives the reader this idea of, well, here's a reality, here's a mystical version. Which one are you going to pick?
yeah,
He
yeah,
comes kind of full circle, and we, the reader, will go, oh, there was obviously a happy ever after because why
yeah,
would he lie about such a thing? But I don't think there was necessarily any evidence before that to suggest that that's exactly what he was like.
yeah, no. Yeah, that kinda makes sense,
And even
actually.
the death of his brother, just convenient. Oh, nothing I could do about that. That was nothing to do with me. Um,
Oh, yeah, the yeah, oh,
the Viscount,
there was
yeah,
a siren, which I didn't really understand. Some of the parts,
yeah.
like, I didn't quite, like, understand. I'm like, "The siren? Like, what's going on here?" Like, it
But
was very, like
yeah,
yeah, a
but
little
more than anything, I just like the open-ended nature of it. I think I just enjoy the fact that you can decide for yourself
yeah,
whichever version that you want to, or that you're unsure, because I just like when books do that kind of thing, and they kind of pick your own ending. I wrote the book, and I've given you two versions of the ending here. One, if you're kind of reading, trusting what you're reading, you'll just accept, you'll never think of the other one. And the other one, if you're a cynic, you can have your own version as well if you want, and
yeah.
you can argue it
Yeah,
out.
those type of books are really fun. I really like
Yeah,
those too. Yeah, yeah. But it gives you enough to, like, do that, rather than
absolutely. Yeah.
but you were right, like, and I think that's also where I was like, "Yeah, there was no way he was ever gonna change." Like, there was
Hmm.
but even when he's like, "Oh, the brother," like, "Oh, poor thing," but it was like Eric, Um, and I think that's kinda where I get my even if she had stayed with him and, like, eh, there was
Absolutely.
you're not gonna change Eric, like, Eric in the book is probably, as you said, a psychopath or a sociopath or something,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, and there's no change in that. You know what I mean? So
So yeah, good book. Thank you for picking it.
thank you for reading it with me. I really appreciate it. I know we got to
So,
pick another one.
do indeed, yeah.
Which
Plenty
version
to
did
choose
you?
from, which is good. I read the Penguins Classics version.
Oh, I read this one.
Which version? Oh, your
Pretty, yeah,
pretty version,
very pretty. And then
super
I
pretty.
also have this one, which when you're saying 500-page book, I thought you were meaning like this one.
Oh no, they just had
Yeah,
the wrong
so,
page count on it, which was oh well, what can you do? But I was like, oh my
so
god, how's this going to be 500 pages? Especially sometimes classic books can have the tiny, tiny, tiny font, and you're like, oh,
yeah.
this is 6 months reading of my life.
And they go on for like 100 pages about a tree branch. It's very exciting. It's very exciting.
Yes. I like the farming section of Anna Karenina. That's not a popular opinion. There's
All right,
long
fair
sections
enough.
in farming, but that's the bit I can get my teeth into and go, that's quite interesting economically. And anyway,
I really like Thomas Hardy's, especially with Test the D'Urbervilles, and he does that a lot, where he'll like
right.
explain the weather and like the landscape. But it is because it reflects the characters in internal like
Mhm.
what's going on with them, and B, he was also getting paid by the word most likely. So
Oh
like,
yes, yes,
you
they were
know,
getting published
yeah,
serially. Yeah,
exactly.
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
hey, do what you do.
That's the way to do it.
Any final thoughts about the novel version of Phantom of the Opera, the OG, as you will? Get it?
Yeah, it is.
OG? Get
Oh,
it?
gee, yeah.
Oh!
Do you get it?
Original Gangster or Opera
Original
Ghost, the
Gangsters Opera
OG.
Ghost. I get it. I get it.
Oh, yeah,
I
I
was
thought it was
thinking
fun.
G was probably Ghost. I'm so what's O? Oh, it's not old. It's Opera Ghost. Yes,
No, no, it's cool.
yeah. Okay.
So so
No,
final
no
thoughts.
final thoughts other than like pleasantly surprised. I knew after about 120 pages, I was absolutely loving it because of the kind of the way that Leroux was playing with me
Mm,
and connecting things together and making me make links that sometimes were false. He was sort of playing with me a bit like the Phantom, but ultimately kind of gave me something that was pretty satisfying, and I had copious amount of notes, which is not always the case for classic books. I have to say, sometimes I kind of go, oh, stuff happened, but nothing worth really reflecting on. Whereas this one did.
awesome, awesome. I have to say, I wasn't again, I probably am about like I'm tainted by Andrew Lloyd Webber's version, let's just be honest.
Yeah.
Um, but I do think reading the original book really helped me understand a lot of the dynamics about these
Hmm.
characters. I also really like getting the true version of Erik. Um, and maybe we'll talk about this in another stream, maybe we won't. But I think that Erik is a really interesting character that you can play a ton of different ways. Like
Yes.
here, he was definitely menacing, but there was an absence of certain things. But in other versions, like Andrew Lloyd Webber, there's like a real like deeper romanticism about him, and you can analyze it to the hilt. Like it's really amazing. And maybe we'll get into that at some point.
Yeah.
Um, but I kind of liked seeing how kind of the pure version of the Phantom was originally intended. So I really appreciated that.
Yeah.
Um, Yep. So I enjoyed
Fantastic.
it. I thought it was good. I thought it was a good original creepy gothic book because it is
Yes.
one of the most
Very
original
Gothic.
gothic
Yeah.
books. Yeah. So I really enjoyed the experience of reading it.
Yeah.
All
Definitely.
right,
Good
Chris,
fun.
thank you so much for being here. If people
Thank
wanted
you for
more of your
inviting me.
content, you're welcome. If you people wanted more of your content, where can they find you?
Well, you might be able to find me on my YouTube channel. I haven't posted very much, but I do take part in a couple of podcasts that I do on a weekly basis that a lot of my energy goes into. So, Speculative Speculations is a podcast that we talk about sci-fi books in all their forms. Whether long, we do usually a couple 100 pages of a book, usually in a series, and a short story every week. So you can find that both on Spotify, YouTube, or otherwise. Or we're doing the Oscars project as well with my good friends
Mm,
Steve and Jared, where we're looking at every Oscar winner from 1960 up. And our next discussion is on the 1975 film One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
that's
So
cool. That's a good one.
yeah,
That's a
so we're
good
doing
one.
that
That's
this week.
exciting.
We're releasing next week, I think. So,
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here, Chris, and I'll have you pick the next one, right?
yes, indeed, we'll have to plan it and schedule it and read it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining me. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.